Welcome to Jusoor, which translates as Bridges, a one-to-one discussion with individuals of prominence and significance in the West that aims to find the common grounds, promote the friendships and affinities, and discover the realities and the facts behind the headlines. The Dove and Dolphin mission was a campaign that saw a cargo vessel carrying tons of basic aid and foodstuff shipped from a port in southern England to Gaza a few years ago. The symbolic impact of this shipment was significant. At a time when warships were heading for the region to launch a military attack, this ship was heading for a besieged people to offer them medicine, clothing and food as they and their children felt or started to feel hungry and ill. This cargo was chartered by a local orthopedic and trauma surgeon and a fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons in London. For a number of years now, his time has been mainly occupied with monitoring as well as working and campaigning for the Palestinians and speaking against Western policies in Afghanistan and Iraq. He has repeatedly paid visits to Gaza and over the years has become a very good friend and supporter of the Palestinian people. My guest today is Dr. David Halpin. David Halpin, thank you very much for joining me on Jusoor tonight.
I'm very pleased to be here.
Let me first of all start by asking you, what is the Dove and Dolphin? Give us a little bit of a background about the Dove and Dolphin and about how you yourself became involved in this sort of second occupation, or basically having now retired, maybe your main occupation in speaking for and working for the Palestinians.
It certainly fills almost all my days speaking about Palestine and working for Palestine and for Iraq. I was sitting in a meeting in November 2002, hearing how doctors, a Palestine meeting in London, big meeting, hearing how doctors with drugs for Palestinian people were being stopped at the IOF checkpoints.
Yes.
And I thought it was intolerable, utterly intolerable. It was outrage really inside me. And I sat there and I said, then I must take a boat so big that it gets publicity. With publicity, it would be safe. Yes. Otherwise, it wouldn't be safe.
Yes.
And that's how it started. And within 2 months, we were setting sail from Torquay.
When was this?
1st of February 2003. It was a cry for Palestine, a cry for Palestine. 60 years from the Nakba, or 55 years then,
yes.
And it was a cry against the looming war on Iraq.
Yes, because it was around that same time. I mean,
it was exactly,
only a few weeks later, the war on Iraq was launched, and therefore it was very precarious, I would suggest. It was very dangerous.
You can't measure that very easily. There was some danger, and I felt it a bit, certainly as the leader, when we were sailing across the Mediterranean, particularly in the Eastern Mediterranean, when there was a cordon that had been flung across between Cyprus and Egypt, I believe. Yes. We saw warships, and the master of the watch was interrogated, you know, from helicopters and fixed-wing planes. But it was really the fact that they were the devils, planning a war based on lies, when Palestine was still in agony. That's what particularly angered me. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
The cry was, heal Palestine.
Yes.
You see?
When you say the ship, how big was the ship? Just to give
the ship was the various ways of measuring tonnage, but it was 66 meters long. It wasn't a small. It was a small.
Quite substantial.
Oh yes, it was, and it could have taken 1,100 tons. But I would have found it more difficult to afford 1,100 tons of wheat flour.
Yes.
And we'd have had tons of lorries at Ashdod in Israel. We had 4 as it was, and they were articulated, so it was quite a decent volume. But it was tiddly in the hold.
Yes. And the cargo went direct to Gaza?
We went down, and then the lorries went separately to Kane, the so-called commercial checkpoint, and we met the lorries there. There's some interesting stories attached to all of this. I must write the book one day.
Yes, you must. Well, let me ask you, before we go any further, where were you before that meeting in 2002? What was your impression of Palestine, of that particular region, of the conflict? What was your impression, and how did that change after that meeting in 2002?
Well, Anas, I have a very bad memory of what my thoughts were, but I've always been a skeptic, and I've never liked seeing underdogs kicked around. So I can't imagine I was happy with Palestine, but I was in a specialty where I was working really pretty hard, and to find energy and time Even then, my family used to, lost out with my absorption in medicine, my duties in medicine. But I had Palestinian housemen, one in particular called Abu Lafi, who I think might be a urologist in Jerusalem. And he said, do you know what they're doing to us in Palestine, Mr. Halpin? I said, I got a pretty sure idea, Abu Lafi. This is years ago. He said, I don't think you've got any idea. He was a rather hard man.
Yes.
I understand why. But he was telling me something which I probably knew in my heart, but only from 2002 have I really got to know what's going on.
And since then, how many times have you paid a visit to...
Well, I went with a boat with three other Britons.
Was that the very first time that you went there?
With a boat, yes, it was.
That was the very first time that
when I got there, because I'd read a lot and thought a lot, thinking is the most important part of it, really, it was no surprise. Two of my companions, there was one young fellow, Stuart, John, and the two older men, they wept at least on 2 occasions in Gaza with what there was to be seen, houses demolished, that sort of thing. But I didn't weep, and I think it was the surgeon's response. When you see a sick person, you don't start weeping, you do your jolly best, you do your very best to get working, get them better. Do you understand me?
Yes.
So mine was I'm not wanting to sound sanctimonious about this, but I think that I'd seen it in my mind, I'd visualized it, and it wasn't, but when I saw Rafah, it is unbelievable. I've got film of that. I show it when I'm talking about our charity, and I say it's like Warsaw, 1944.
Since then, how many times have you gone back?
6 times.
6 times. Yeah. And over those 6 times, I take it that you've had now, you have friends over there now, people that know you, you know them, you know their plight, you know their life stories. How has that, I don't want to say changed you, but how has that affected your approach towards Palestine and that particular issue?
Well, so many things to say. But, Palestine is a symptom of all that's wrong with the way we run our world. The way that incestuous governments divide people up. If I took, a lot of people will shrink from the idea of Palestine. Gaza, I can just see it, they said. The Israelis regard it as a nest of snakes. That's how they see Gaza. But, I know if I took most British people with some preparation and sat them down alongside a dear little Palestinian family, a poor family, they'd learn a lot from that family, and vice versa. Do you understand me? Yes. That it's the universality of humanity which should be emphasized. But everything in our media, in our culture, almost everything, not all, but almost everything is for division. And to pull the wool over people's eyes about how some people are being treated with dreadful cruelty, including in Iraq and Afghanistan and in Africa. Yes. The way we pollute their economies, talk about exporting when all they should be doing is just looking after themselves. Things like that. Yes. All the way around, you see distortion. A lot of it's to do with the bucks, but a lot of it's to do with, I'm afraid, psychopaths running the show. That is, people who have an abnormal response to the suffering or loss of others. People who don't feel the pain of seeing a mother held at a checkpoint and having a baby on a cold mattress on a cold winter's night outside Hebron. This happened on the 7th of January this year.
Yes. I'm going to come back to speak at length in regards with Palestine and Western policies in regards with what's happening there. Yeah. But let me take you a little bit back, because the war in Afghanistan was something that you also spoke quite loudly against.
Yes. Yes.
Again, was it the doctor? Was it the orthopedic and trauma surgeon that was speaking? Was it the human being? Was it someone who saw through the kind of myths and deceptions being, promoted by the media or by government? Which part of that was the person who actually spoke against something that most people around the world thought was a good thing, to dispose of the Taliban government?
A good war.
Yes.
Yes. Well, what was it? It was partly the skeptic, partly that anything this lot do.
Have you always been a skeptic?
Yes, I have. Always. If you cannot be a good doctor if you're not a skeptic. You're a fool as a doctor. In fact, I don't think many doctors are not skeptics.
And does that carry outside the hospital, outside the wards?
It must do. It must do. And also, being a doctor, you should have a good forensic ability as well to analyse things, which is what politicians have hardly any ability to at all. As you know, our last Prime Minister, now posing as a peace envoy in the Middle East, and having recently joined 2 days ago JP Morgan, who are going to suck the wealth out of Iraq. He apparently can't do detail. Well, you have to do detail if you're running the show, and if you're running a patient who's unwell, you need detail then.
Of course.
So going back to why I spoke against Afghanistan, I wrote in the papers, well, our local paper, our regional paper, the reason was that I'm not sure about the 9/11 thing, but I thought I smelt a rat there, to be quite blunt about it. There's been no judicial response to that, and no judicial response to the 7/7. And yet it's constantly used by the BBC in particular to damn, to stigmatise the Muslim. I like truth, and that's really what it's about. I grew up in a family where lying was a cardinal sin. I think a lot of British families, I know Muslim families, are the same. But it's something which has been submerged, beneath spin. Lying. Spin is lying. So I think it was the need for truth. I knew it was untruthful. And when you read, for instance, Pilger's recent article 2 days ago, where he analyses as best he can, it's chaos, it's a maelstrom. But in that article, he shows you just how they were just moving the pawns around the chessboard. And that's exactly what they're doing in Afghanistan. And the poor lads who they send out from our country with rifles and the rest of it, they don't know that, and they can't see it, and they're not told it, and they won't get it from the BBC.
And obviously, 6-7 years on from that, nothing has happened to change your mind in that
Nothing has happened.
regard?
Not at all. We're not told how many Afghan civilians, how many mummies and babies and daddies have been killed or maimed. We know there were lots of refugees initially. Do you remember that?
Yes.
That's almost forgotten about now.
The drug trafficking.
Oh, the drug trafficking.
Supposed to stem.
When I was writing, Simon Jenkins in I think it was the Times then he wrote for, he spoke about how the Taliban had stamped on the opium production, which anyway is a very useful drug, but if it's used properly, a wonderful drug, and how now it's flourishing, with about a third of Karzai's cabinet. The Karzai's cabinet as warlords. The deal was done. And one wonders who the big men are who are making the money out of the opium now.
And then obviously Iraq, we had Iraq, and that again was another calamity to add to the, is it blunders, is it crimes, what is it?
The invasion of Iraq, first of all, the 13 years of sanctions was, these words are easily used and they're overused because we see no end to it. But that was a crime of immense dimension. It was slow genocide, just as the Palestinian Nakba, the catastrophe, is slow genocide. Those 13 years were terrible. I only learnt the other day from a very good friend and journalist that we, the British, bombed the General Hospital and the Pediatric Hospital, Children's Hospital, in Basra in 1991. I didn't know that before because the media hasn't told me it. But what happened to those children, the reasons for Halliday and von Spanik resigning, he spoke of genocide, Halliday, and so it was. So we had that, and the bombing, so-called no-fly zone, and then we have this invasion based on an absolute tissue of lies with Americans and Australians, special forces in there before the war even started, and the British. It is the supreme international war crime as defined by the Nuremberg Tribunal. And it's the supreme international crime because all other crimes flow from it. Like, for instance, the abrogation, the ignoring, the abrogation of all of responsibility for medical services. They are destroyed, and they've been destroyed by the sanctions and then by the supreme international war crime from March 22 onwards of 2003. And so that's a very good definition, that. It is a supreme crime because all other things, the torture in Abu Ghraib and the rape and the destruction of civilians and the maiming, I can hardly talk about it.
It's, I mean, when you put it so bluntly, it's quite mesmerizing. How is it that either governments or certain sectors of the media seem to be winning the argument in terms of the public still not seeing what you've just been talking about? I mean, the issue of the Iraq catastrophe did not start in March 2003, but it started way back in 1991, maybe even before that, when we supported a rogue regime and a tyrannical regime in Iraq, that repressed its own people. People don't speak about that now. Why do you think that is? Is it because the argument is so compelling? Is it because of there are certain failures on behalf of the people who ought to be speaking more, or know about these things, are more attached to it, and therefore they're failing in their positions? Why is it that still public opinion, although we are now seeing a tide of sort of resentment due to other attached failures, such as on the economic level or social level, the such,
yes, yeah.
but still people aren't seeing through the kind of smoke screens and the myths and the deceptions and the kind of cliches that are being presented?
Well, we could talk on us for hours about this, but let's work from the bottom up quickly. The population, to generalize, is hedonistic. They're interested in pleasure. You only have to look at a football crowd on a Saturday afternoon. I have to join them on a train sometimes when they're out of their minds with alcohol and hear the language, to know that there are some people, okay, people can enjoy a good football match. I'm not being haughty about that. Yeah. But you've got people are somewhat self-obsessed. Yeah. People are frightened. A lot of people are frightened, actually. They're under the heel, really. They're worrying about, look at the fuel prices now. Yes. Look at mortgage costs. Look at short contracts. They have to worry about whether their employer has a good view of them. Then you've got the media, the fourth estate, which is absolutely foul in this country. It looks good. I see them reading it on the train coming up, the Observer and the rest of it, Independent on Sunday. Most of it's trash. They don't know that 80% of the paper is being paid for by advertisers who have to be served. But they're not being informed by the media, and especially by the public service broadcaster and all the Reithian nonsense. And then we have at the top, we have the forum. And I'm afraid that is, and they provide an illusion of democracy. I'd give you some value in about 5% of the MPs, less than that actually, really, to be frank about it. I'm seeing more and more in my research and research of others just what a sham it is. So we have an illusory democracy. Yeah. We have a misinformed, we have the fourth estate lying to people, not telling them the facts, not getting down to the brass tacks and examining things properly. Look at BBC News at 6 o'clock now. It's just like a sort of Hello magazine. Just a few things inserted, a few lies from Bush, nonsense about Blair, and then a bit of personality. Personality, that's a big thing. That's a good distraction for the population. They're distracted, they're frightened, they're very poorly informed. So John Pilger's people power will take a lot to emerge in this country, I'm sorry to say. South America is a sort of beacon, in a way, that people there have had enough, and they're standing up, and they're going to speak for themselves more often.
What will it take for that kind of movement to happen
here in
the West?
I don't know. I find it very difficult, actually. I sometimes despair, not too often, because if I end up despairing, then my pals in, my brothers and sisters, or sisters and brothers, as I say, in Palestine,
will suffer.
Will suffer. I'm not being pompous about that either. No, it's but I mean that myself as one of many thousands who are acting for speaking up in this country for an oppressed people somewhere else. If we despair too much, so one has to remain practical. But I think that we're in a very strange time. I say that a darkness has fallen over the world. It has, to be quite blunt about it. You see the Chinese, chasing down an entirely materialistic life, aided by Mr. Blair again, of course, actually recently. But people being displaced from the land. What a great sadness. They end up in factories producing chips when they're, extraordinary what's happening throughout our world. So how it will change, I don't know. I've thought for a long time that economic recession of some size would make people think, because when they suffer, they think more. I'll be quite blunt about it.
Yes, it's unfortunate, but it's true. You've touched on how this ignorance or foul play on behalf of either the government or the media, or in terms of the ignorance throughout society, or available or present on a wide scale throughout society, is affecting the issues either in Palestine or in Iraq or in Afghanistan or as such. But how is that affecting us here at home? I mean, how are the failures in Iraq or in Afghanistan or in, generally throughout the Arab or Muslim world or throughout the Middle East or in Palestine, how is that touching on the lives of Britons or Americans or French or German here? Because it seems that it's only when people start feeling it at home that they start paying attention.
Well, I've thought a lot about this, and I think that what they have done, if you I think the Prophet has a good aphorism for it. If you live a lie, as you have done with Palestine, Britain has been a treacherous country towards the Arab world generally, but especially towards the Palestinian people. But if you live a lie, that does reflect on if the ethical basis of a country is tainted by that sort of treachery, it is treachery, or perfidy is another rather abstruse word for it, then it does have an effect upon the people. People make excuses. They are finding ways to excuse the lie. And I think now that what has happened in Iraq and Afghanistan, and for a longer time in Palestine and elsewhere, that hasn't had an effect on national morale. People are divided up. People can't enjoy pleasures, to be quite frank. I've been retired a few years now. It'd be quite nice just to spend my time with my grandchildren. Yes. Do you understand me? I not want to say I'm suffering on this, but it is extraordinary. These people cause chaos all around the world. They're feeling the pain, of course, but the thing is, instead of just perhaps going to Palestine and sitting down in a little courtyard with a family, just talking, you have to think about the F-16 going overhead, or the Apache helicopter, or whatever, or what they're going to do with the cannon to the fishermen who just a few kilometres off the shoreline. Yes. So what I'm trying to say is that instead of us all getting on with our lives and thinking of each other and doing proper things like being doctors or whatever, or writers or poets, we're at it and we're reading about this horror every day. Every day there's killing. And that has its effect. And the Americans are more used to that, because they started off killing the North American Indian. And that holocaust to 20 million people, North American Indians, with smallpox and all the rest of it, and rifles, that has had its effect on some of them, as came out in that film by Columbine, Bowling for Columbine.
Yes.
When Charlton Heston says, "Why do we kill people?"
Yes.
And he said, "Well, we've been, it's on our hands. In other words, it's habitual." And that's the feeling. You see, when the Americans talk about, Rumsfeld, war for 100 years or something, they say that it's the most terribly evil thing to say. Evil, war should be the last resort.
Does it give you a glimmer of hope that at least George Bush and Tony Blair, who led the military campaigns in Afghanistan and Iraq, and are still pushing for this cycle of violence under the gaze of, or the premise of, the war on terror, does it bring you a little bit of hope that they haven't been hailed as conquerors by their people, that they, Tony Blair left when everyone was hoping that he would leave today before tomorrow. George W. Bush today enjoys a popularity that is so low that it is the lowest in living memory. Does that maybe offer a little bit of a positive sign that maybe people are seeing through what is really happening?
A microscopic piece of hope, I'm afraid. Because he'll be replaced with, if you see these ghastly caucuses which they've been showing on television, which I've objected to for their triviality. We shouldn't be seeing it. It's relevant almost the way that it's being done. All bribed, all bribed. Blair's been replaced by a rather glummer-looking chum who has exactly the same mentality, also a psychopath. And no, it doesn't actually. And all its people do, people feel, I think people in this country feel, the commonest thing they say is, I feel powerless.
Yes.
That, of course, makes me very angry.
Of course.
Because, of course, it makes people like me less powerful.
Yes.
Do you understand me, don't you?
Absolutely.
But that is, it is almost as if, and I see it in my own son, actually, he, and in other young people, or younger people, and they say that, it's going down the tube.
Yes.
The world, that's it. Well, the thing is, they've got children. That's why I'm acting, is for children. And I'll tell you that about it in a minute.
Yes, absolutely. Well, let's continue this discussion after the break. Ladies and gentlemen, don't go away. We'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back. Dr. David Halpin, tell me, what drives you? What's your motivation?
Well, I've already said, Anas, that lying was verboten in our family. Seeing underdogs kicked around, that was a very strong feeling. We never liked seeing people who were weakly being treated poorly.
But that's the state of the world.
No,
that's,
no. Don't accept
that is how the world
Don't accept
operates.
it.
No?
Don't accept it. Don't accept it. And I think that's probably part of a motivation being a doctor, is looking after people who aren't so well. But the third thing, the main thing really, is the child. I've always loved babies. I was the eldest of 4, and I saw my mother feeding and looking after my siblings, and she was a very gentle person. I think it's come over to me. So I've always loved babies. And I got, we just recently had a 3rd grandchild, little Lila, which I think means darkness in Arabic. And above her there's Isabel and Nell. And what I say is, I look at their blonde hair and their lustrous skin, look into their eyes, and their lovely, happy eyes, and I see 2 billion of the world's children. 2 billion. And I say, when I'm speaking to groups, not one of them should be harmed. Not one should be harmed. They're all equally precious. And that's a very strong motivation indeed. And the other factor, of course, is as a doctor, as a surgeon, I've mostly been healing people, diagnosing their ills and healing them, ridding them of pain, particularly within my specialty as an orthopedic surgeon. So the idea of blowing people apart is absolutely abhorrent. I'm not a pacifist. I would have fought in the last war for my country. I assure you of that. I think I would have done. But those are my 4 main motivations.
How do you, how have you seen the response of the people in Gaza and Rafah whenever you go and visit? And I take it that you don't know the language. You have a few words in your vocabulary that you use, but apart from that, how do you sense the responses every time you go back?
Well, when you go through the sort of ultra-modern areas, it's now ultra-modern, looks like an airport terminal, and you go down this long tunnel, which gets shabbier and the toilets are overflowing. You get to the other end, it's all broken up. There's a few beaten up taxis there. But the soldier there, he writes down your name, for the statistics for the Palestinian Authority, so-called. You just get, although the sort of the world changes over 300 yards, there's a person. That's what I'd say, especially. And that's a very strong impression I get in Arab lands, is that they treat you, they look at you, and they don't look at you as a Briton or a Norwegian or a Jew or whatever. Well, that isn't, sadly, that's changed with the continued oppression in recent years, I'm told.
Yes.
Told at one time it was...
people lived side by side.
Yes, they did. And a Muslim mum would say, a Palestinian mum would not like hearing her children referring to a Jew as a Jew, I'm told. And I believe it too, actually. They look at you as a person. They look at you in the eyes and they judge you by that. And if they think you're an honest person, then you get on perfectly well. And I do. I have to... I've had one or two experiences, which I won't go into now, but yes, I am welcomed there. They don't fall over themselves, which I think is excellent. There's no licking of boots, and but I'm pleased to be there. And I hope that my wife Sue will join me this March when we go to a medical seminar in Gaza, which in spite of all the suffering, which has increased over this 20 months of a siege, 20 months long. In spite of all the suffering, they're sticking with it, and they're going to. They've decided to do a seminar. My good friends there, and we've been invited. We're guest of honour, in fact, and not a thing I'm not used to, but so I'm just pleased to be there with people who have put up with something that's beyond belief. They talk about where their land was before, the grandparents. Quite extraordinary, actually.
Someone who has also recently paid visit to that particular area is George Bush. What were your notes on his visits, on his comments, on how he spoke? He did speak of the need for a Palestinian state. That surely represents some sort of movement forwards, does it not?
None at all.
How is that?
Well, the thing is that although he spoke about Israel withdrawing from the settlements in the West Bank, they've already in fact played that card, about 4 years ago when they said that facts on the ground was what I think Sharon called it, and they've acknowledged facts on the ground as the Americans. So they have now about 8 ghettos in the West Bank with about 300 plus checkpoints. They've got a quizzling to deal with, and fellow quizzlings, with Mahmoud Abbas. And it's all being carved out rather nicely. But the happy thing is, although there's no solution, is about 80% of the Palestinians, I would guess, know what's going on. There are a few making money, perhaps, who'd be quite pleased to see some ghastly solution, a sort of, occupied ghettos, really. Or surveyed ghettos with CCTV cameras sort of viewing them, really. But no control over their economy, just money being fed in, at the whim. I thought it was rather nauseating, actually, his visit with his on Aircraft One, the 5 helicopters landing in Ramallah on the thing there. And it's totally dishonest. Like his friend who's there as envoy. Well,
that's my next question. I mean, we have had guests on this program who have commented on the irony, almost, of Tony Blair being appointed peace envoy, no less. Someone who has, launched far more wars in modern-day Britain than any other prime minister, and has really done very little in terms of bringing peace to that particular region, and maybe further beyond. How do you see that? I mean, is that going to last, particularly with Mr. Blair's recent appointment as part-time advisor to JP Morgan? I mean, what will come from that?
Well, one can say all sorts of things. I already referred to him as a psychopath, which he is. I mean that, and I mean that. I have no reservation in calling him that. He's sent people. He sent this country to war 5 times. They talk about it. Other time, actually on Channel 4. Snow. It was when they were talking about the personalities you refer to as, with mixed results. How about that for euphemism? Mixed results. You know, with 1.2 million people killed in Iraq, and at least twice that number maimed, probably 2 million refugees. But going back to Anthony Linton Blair and his job at the moment, I think it's risible that he should have sent to the Middle East. I object to it. I think it's a great insult to the Arab peoples generally, and to the Palestinian people in particular.
And it speaks volumes of our intentions in regards with peace, doesn't it?
Well, it's in fact an arrogant gesture, really. And I think this is used quite a lot. You know, the thing is that what matters a lot is what is people's intentions. What is his intention? He has no intention of seeing Palestinian people freed. If he was interested in Palestinian people being freed, then he'd be talking about their right of return.
Yes. Yes.
You see, and of a Palestine restored, you know, with Jewish people who want to live peacefully with Palestinian neighbours,
as they have been for centuries.
Yeah, as they have. Well, yes, in smaller numbers, admittedly, but he'd be doing that. But he hasn't, and you know that.
Now, what kind of? You see, the thing is, I mean, doctors are supposed to bring hope, if I may say so. Now, you portray a fairly
black.
Yes, very, very kind of gloomy picture. But the effects of what is happening, of the policies, of the kind of attitudes, of the approach to what's happening in that particular region and far beyond, it's, as you said, it's bringing division, it's bringing chaos, it's not bringing peace to the region. And ultimately, it is affecting us here at home. I mean, we are also sensing that there is far less security than there ever was before 9/11,
yes.
that the world is on high alert as it has never been over the past 30, 40 years. Now, it doesn't look very optimistic, does it?
It doesn't. And I think you must serve the truth. And the thing is that I think, you know, I'm not, although I do get down. I'm an emotional person. But I like the beauty of nature.
Yes.
I plant trees, I have lovely woodlands.
Yes.
I live on Dartmoor, which is a beautiful place to be. I love the beauty of the world, but I'm afraid a lot of the humans in it, particularly the people who pretend to be leaders, let it down. My view is a fairly stark one, but it has to be stark. Because, you see, the thing is that the merry people who go around talking about peace, I meet them, I talk to them,
yes.
And they make it all sounding it'll be better one day, whatever. They are not suffering like the people in Iraq, for instance, or in Palestine and elsewhere, as I said, in Africa. So it's stark, and I do try and find ways, but I think the first way you have to start, when you're talking about, if we had no problem, then fair enough, but we do have massive suffering in the world, induced, and caused by intrigue and by greed. And the only way you can start is to first of all analyze what you've got to start with, which is what I'm doing. But I think that that then you have to talk about how the first thing people should feel is outrage. Unless they feel outrage, they just have a flat response, you're finished. They're going to go down the tube with the rest of them. The thing is that's what I'm going to say on Thursday at a meeting in Gloucester, in Stroud, is when we talk about what should we do. I said, well, the first thing you must do is to feel outrage that this should be happening, that a child in Lebanon should be incinerated or near incinerated with a thermobaric weapon fired from one of the 32,000 aerial sorties from the Israeli Air Force. You see? And so but they feel, when it's outrage, and then when they've informed themselves properly, a lot of people aren't informed, they then stand up and they start moving as a population.
George W. Bush, continuing his visit now, visiting the certain Gulf states and the such, he's sounded certain, what many may seem as good noises in terms of speaking about democracy and reform and the such. However, you've spoken...
What, democracy?
Yes. Well, this is where I'm coming to, because you've spoken about the state of democracy even in the countries which claim to fight wars in order to
Yes,
promote
yes,
democracy.
yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the democracy in the state, I said it was illusory here. It's completely illusory in the States. No question about that.
How?
Well, again, the media has it in its grip. I don't look at the stuff, but I would imagine that Fox News and the rest of them make pretty sure the people aren't informed. I know after 9/11 they had a constant roller going for months and months, I'm told, down the bottom, a distracting thing. And that when they went into Iraq, the American people were told that Iraq was associated with the attacks, whatever their cause, on the Twin Towers.
Yes.
Well, we have to also remember Tower 7, of course,
yes,
which wasn't attacked, which also came down.
Yes.
Very important point. So that's illusory. I think that some of the Scandinavian countries have much more livelier democracies, as far as I can tell. I note that some of them support Western action in Iraq, sadly. And there are countries which are showing more concern. But I think that the Anglo-American axis, or the Israeli Anglo-American axis of evil, I would call it, democracy is largely a sham. Now, I include Israel in that. They have a better press, actually, than us, with more outspoken people. But it's a strange electoral setup, as you might know.
Yes, yes, of course. A recent kind of language being used in respect to people like yourself who criticize government stands, who criticize the country's policies, in various parts of the world, is that you are, self-haters.
Oh yes.
That you loathe your own country, that you loathe your own people. It's quite a very harsh and very bitter kind of accusation.
It is. Well, that term, as you know, is mostly used against Jews who speak bluntly about Israeli action.
Yes.
It's a rather nasty term, actually, self-hating Jews.
Yes.
But it's a way, of course, of making those people like Asmon and Ilan Pape, perhaps, all so many, actually, and warm-hearted people they are, but it's a way of unsettling them and making them feel very, very uncomfortable. I think a patriot is a person who stands up for his country and speaks the truth, and I'm a patriot. I love my country. I think nationhood is very important in running people, not running a democracy, but in it's a country that is proud of, that not pride, the pride's the wrong word, but a country which is happy with itself, and happy with how it looks after its own people, is a good country. This is why I reject the EU thing completely. It's a fascist movement, really. We're seeing it, you can see the way it's cozying up to Israel is a good example, and how it's being driven largely by corporations. There's no democracy in that at all, none at all. So I'm not if they sign myself, and I love my country, and I don't like to see it go down the tube, as it's going down the tube at the moment. The health service, which I worked in since 1964, I was trained by the state, with no charge to my parents. I worked in the health service. It's a superb idea. It's a higher plane of activity, and this lot. New labour.
Well, it's just being undermined, isn't it?
It's being destroyed. They want to destroy it, and people don't understand that. They shrink from it. They say, "Don't tell us that you're activist. You're a self-hater." I'm not a self-hater. They are destroying it. They're doing it in all sorts of ways. Partly burdening it with massive debt, with these PFI schemes around the country, building cheap jack hospitals. But what they don't look at is the people so well. So they ignore the people. The doctors and the nurses and the physios and all the rest of them. But this is typical of what they're at, actually. So I'm not self-hating about our NHS. I'm proud of NHS. I want to go back to how it used to be.
Yes. So, as one of my previous guests once said, that a patriot is someone who also cares about how his country looks in the eyes of the world.
Exactly. Exactly. I think at the moment our country is loathed. We're loathed in the Arab world, although the man in the street, the street, that silly expression they have, a lot of them in fact have good reasons for detesting their own leaders.
Yes.
They're dictators in most cases. But I know that this country, at its political level, is loathed throughout the world, actually.
How do you see, coming back to Palestine, because this is the issue that you're mostly connected to, how do you see this moving, either forward or backward, in the foreseeable future? We had the Palestinian elections over a year ago. The outcome of that was fairly disastrous, in terms of how the world dealt with that and the consequences of who we dealt with and how we dealt with those elements and the such. The siege of Gaza has been crippling. The treatment of people living in enclaves, refugee camps, basically, has been vile. And it seems that the Palestinian Authority is moving more and more towards offering more and more concessions in order to get what it can. Is that something that you see as, not as positive, but is there some room for movement?
When Hamas, I didn't know a great deal about the politics, but when 43% of I think it was 76% turnout, voted for Hamas, there was a feeling actually amongst the activists, I don't like that word, that was a good thing. I felt it very strongly. I thought it would give clarity. What is happening to the people of Gaza in particular, but also in the West Bank, are also suffering greatly in Jenin and Nablus with these almost nightly raids, at 2 o'clock in the morning, with the most advanced machinery of death, and people being hiked off, blindfolded to prison.
Yes.
There is clarity in that. They have nothing else to do.
Yes.
They're sitting it out. People are listening. Some reporters are reporting properly, but I can't see. I don't have much hope, I'm afraid, in the Parliament of this country. There are a few people who are active, like Corbyn, for Palestine.
Yes, we had him as a guest here.
But most of the time, they stigmatise Hamas in particular. It's portrayed as, terrorism was always emphasised. They forget the terrorism of Zionism, which helped to found the State of Israel. They forget the al-Nakba, the catastrophe, the cleansing, which I hated, or rather euphemism, cleansing, the terror which drove out 800,000 Palestinians in between March and autumn of 1948. So they forget all that, and they certainly forget in the House of Commons, which is people that live in a bubble. But you see, these are the people that are meant to take action. So all we have to get back to, and it's a hell of a struggle, is what John Pilger talks about, which is people power, and making sure the outrage spreads. But I have to say, Anas, that people don't feel it. Even my own family, they don't feel that outrage. Life goes on, and there's whatever, skiing holiday or something. That's the problem. But there is a thing I must say, you get a climate of opinion. Sometimes things change. There's an excellent analysis that I would like to quote, and I can't find it on my computer, but a German, American Jewish writer analysed Germany in the 30s. And he talked about how everyone was hoping, they could see it was wrong, what was happening, a lot of people could see it was wrong, but they were waiting for someone else to stand up, for something to happen. And the twilight was there, and suddenly it was dark, like it is. And that's what's happening here a bit in the moment. But you see, we're better off for communications, although I've spoken with disdain about what we have in this country, in our fourth estate. But there is still that, one just hopes that it'll click. And I think actually a recession might help it, oddly. I think that quite strongly. When people suffer, they'll think, who's running the show? And they realize, in fact, that there are rogues running the show. And we see the roguishness every day, we hear it. Mr. Hayne being the last one. And whatever they say about it, his behavior is roguish.
Yes, yes. The charity that you set up after the mission, the
Yes.
Dolphin charity, what's ahead of it? What things are you about to do with that? Where do you hope to take that? And how do you see the general feeling amongst the, let's use a very loose coinage, the activist kind of community, the organizations or groupings that come together and highlight the issue of Palestine, that lobby MPs and governments and
cohesion
such?
isn't easy, because in all these things, there's always keeping people together. My own reaction recently is an example of that. But I see people are determined, still, people not giving up. That we have internet at our, all sorts of things which help. On the charitable front, on the charity front, people are very supportive to the Dove and the Dolphin. They really are. We don't have big income. It's about £35,000, which, you know, a cruise missile is 500,000.
Yes, of course.
You look what money is flowing into Israel.
Of course.
From there, for even private individuals,
Yes.
billions.
Yes.
So, but we've set up an optics centre. We have a man working in Gaza, Nihat Taha, who's a first-class young fellow. He's a computer engineer, so he can send emails to me quickly and photographs. And they set up a place where they can test people's eyes cheaply, or for free actually. And spectacles are dispensed in the same office, Chinese machinery, for about half the normal cost. We're looking now at an audiometry clinic, but it's much more expensive for salaries. But I think we may go ahead with that. We support scholars, we do all sorts of things, things which actually help people get on with it. And of course, as you know, Palestinians are very good at that. They're very ingenious,
Absolutely.
and they're very industrious, contrary to the impression which might be created, again, by our press.
Now, something that whenever I talk about Palestine to a Western audience, the question is, well, what are the Arabs doing? I mean, isn't it the problem of the Arabs? I mean, doesn't that question prop into your mind from time to time?
When I speak to groups, and I've stopped speaking to groups, no one asks me at the moment. Anyway, I'm speaking to you instead. When I'm speaking to groups, the two what I would call pro-Zionist questions are, what about the corruption in the PA? Well, my response usually is, what about the corruption in London or Washington? But anyway, in occupation, corruption thrives. And the second thing, actually, it's to slip my mind, actually, really.
The role of Arabs.
The role of Arabs, yes.
Why aren't the Arab countries housing the Palestinians?
Why aren't they housing them? Yes, why aren't they housing them? I say, well, they had their own houses, I can say, and their own land. They were driven from their houses and their land and their living in 1948. And that was 75% of the Arab population, both Christian and Muslim. So that's one thing. So the obligation is, in fact, under Resolution 194, to have them rehoused exactly from where they came.
Yes. We could literally carry on and on and on, but let me say it's been an absolute pleasure having you. Thank you very, very much.
It's been nice to speak my mind.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in. Please join us next week when we'll be hosting another guest in our attempt to build bridges and establish Jusoor. I'm Anas Altikriti. Goodbye.